In the waning centuries of late antiquity, as the great powers of the Byzantine and Sasanian worlds strained beneath the weight of perpetual war and internal decay, few among emperors, generals, or scholars could have foreseen that, from the arid vastness of the Arabian Peninsula, a land of deserts shimmering under the relentless sun, of scattered oases, and of tribes bound by blood, honor, and ancient custom, there would arise a civilization destined to shape continents, reorder kingdoms, and echo across centuries with a force that would redefine the trajectory of world history. And yet, as caravans wound their way across the immense sandscapes, carrying incense, spices, and stories between two dying empires, the prelude to that transformation was quietly, almost imperceptibly, unfolding in the bustling sanctuary city of Mecca, where in the year 570 CE tradition holds that a child was born into the Banu Hashim clan of the Quraysh, a child named Muhammad, whose life, visions, and message would reorder the spiritual and political map of the Middle East. In a world dominated by polytheistic rites, tribal feuds, and divided loyalties, his proclamation of a stark and uncompromising monotheism declaring that there was but one God, eternal and indivisible, sparked both awe and fury, admiration and persecution, and as he spoke of justice, community, revelation, and moral renewal, the guardians of Meccan tradition bristled, fearing the collapse of the delicate networks of authority and prosperity that had long sustained the city, until the Prophet and his followers, threatened and beleaguered, undertook the Hijra, the migration from Mecca to Yathrib, soon to be renamed Medina, in 622, an event that would inaugurate the Islamic calendar and mark the beginning of a new polity unlike anything Arabia had previously known. From Medina, Muhammad forged a community that transcended tribe and lineage, binding believers into a brotherhood of shared faith, law, and destiny. And through both diplomacy and force he confronted hostile tribes, powerful Meccan factions, and the polytheistic order of Arabia itself, until at last, with Mecca subdued and the Kaaba cleansed of idols, the Prophet stood at the height of his influence, having united most of the peninsula under the banner of Islam. Yet upon his death in 632, a profound question, one that would echo throughout Islamic history, shook the young community: who would lead the Ummah? Thus began the era of the Rashidun Caliphs, the rightly guided, four leaders chosen not by bloodline succession but by consultation and perceived closeness to the Prophet, and under Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali, the modest Muslim state blossomed into a rapidly expanding empire whose armies, hardened by desert life and unified by fervent conviction, burst forth from Arabia in a cascade of astonishing conquests, toppling the Sasanian Empire, seizing Byzantine Syria, Palestine, Egypt, and sweeping across the Middle East with unprecedented speed. Yet even in the midst of these triumphs, internal fractures multiplied. Disputes over authority, justice, and favoritism grew increasingly violent, culminating in the assassinations of 3 caliphs and the crystallization of the Sunni-Shia divide, born from the supporters of Ali ibn Abi Talib, Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law, who believed he had been divinely designated as successor, and whose martyrdom lineage would come to define one of the central religious rifts within Islam. When Ali's rule collapsed amid civil war, the mantle of leadership passed to a powerful Meccan clan, the Umayyads, who, from their capital in Damascus beginning in 661, transformed the caliphate from a consultative leadership into a hereditary monarchy and ushered in a new phase of imperial consolidation, one marked by sweeping western expansion into North Africa and the Iberian Peninsula, halted only by the Frankish victory at Tours, while in the east their armies pressed into Central Asia, establishing frontiers that would remain for centuries, under caliphs like Abd al-Malik, who standardized currency, strengthened administrative systems, and built the breathtaking Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. The Umayyad realm flourished, but the dynasty faced rebellions, tribal rivalries, economic grievances, and accusations of favoring Arab elites over non-Arab converts, tensions that would ultimately erupt in a revolutionary movement in the mid-8th century, sweeping the Umayyads aside in a wave of bloodshed that left only a single surviving prince to flee to Al-Andalus, where he would found the independent Umayyad Emirate and later Caliphate of Córdoba, even as the victorious faction in the east, claiming descent from Abbas, uncle of the Prophet, inaugurated the Abbasid dynasty in 750. With their victory, the center of the Islamic world shifted once more, this time to Baghdad, a new city of glittering palaces, bustling markets, and radiant libraries, soon celebrated as the crown jewel of the medieval world, a metropolis where scholars of every creed and origin, Arabs, Persians, Syriacs, Jews, Christians, joined in an unparalleled project of translation, synthesis, and intellectual exploration, drawing from Greek, Indian, and Persian traditions to produce breakthroughs in medicine, mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, and literature, flourishing under the patronage of caliphs such as the legendary Harun al-Rashid, whose court, immortalized in the tales of Arabian Nights, symbolizes the height of the Islamic Golden Age. But the same currents of diversity and decentralization that fueled cultural brilliance also eroded political unity, for by the mid-9th century, the vast Abbasid realm had begun to fracture, with local dynasties Persian, Arab, and Turkic asserting autonomy, reducing the caliph in Baghdad to a figurehead whose authority remained symbolically potent but militarily hollow, while the multicultural dynamism of the Islamic world deepened as Persian influence surged, reshaping court culture, administration, and literature, and the Arabic script was adopted for the revitalized Persian language. In 945, the Shi'abids took control of Baghdad, limiting the Abbasids to spiritual leadership, even as in North Africa and Egypt the ambitious Shia Fatimid dynasty, tracing its lineage to Fatima, daughter of Muhammad, rose to establish Cairo as a rival capital and challenge the Sunni order, orchestrating networks of missionaries and fomenting ideological struggle across the Middle East, though ultimately failing to overthrow the Abbasids. Meanwhile, in Al-Andalus, the Umayyad legacy endured in a realm of its own, a beacon of cultural splendor that would stand for centuries until slowly eroded by the northward march of the Christian Reconquista. Yet even as the Islamic heartlands fragmented, a new force stirred on the distant steppes, Turkic tribes whose migrations, driven by climate change, political upheaval, and the powerful lure of opportunity, brought waves of nomads into the Middle East, where they embraced Sunni Islam, served in elite military units, and gradually rose to dominance. Among them, the Seljuks emerged as the preeminent power, capturing Baghdad in 1055, ending Buyid rule, assuming the title of Sultan, and promoting a Sunni renaissance that fortified religious institutions and reshaped political life, all while acknowledging the symbolic supremacy of the Abbasid Caliph. In 1071, their victory over the Byzantines at Manzikert opened Anatolia to Turkic settlement, planting the seeds for future Turkish polities, including the Ottoman Empire, while the Sultanate of Rum, a Seljuk offshoot, ruled from Konya and anchored the emerging cultural and ethnic identity of the region. But as the Seljuks rose, the West stirred again. In 1095, the Crusades were launched by the Catholic Church, igniting 2 centuries of conflict as European forces seized Jerusalem and carved out principalities along the Levantine coast. Though many Muslims viewed the Crusaders not as formidable adversaries but as culturally inferior intruders, unaware that the encounter would reshape both Islamic and European societies, the tide turned in the 12th century with the rise of Saladin, a Kurdish Sunni leader who dismantled the Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt, united Syria and Egypt under the Ayyubid banner, defeated the Crusaders at the decisive Battle of Hattin in 1187, and restored Jerusalem to Muslim control, solidifying his legacy as a paragon of chivalry, strategy, and Islamic unity. Yet even as he struggled against the Crusaders, storms gathered in the east once again, where the Seljuk realm fractured and gave rise to the Khwarezmian Empire, a state soon to commit a fateful error, the execution of merchants belonging to a rising power unlike any the world had seen. The Mongols, forged under the iron will of Genghis Khan, whose armies, unmatched in discipline and terror, swept across Eurasia with shattering force. When the Khwarezmians defied the Mongols, they sealed their doom, for within years their empire lay in ruins as Mongol horsemen thundered into Persia, the Caucasus, and Anatolia, leaving devastation in their wake. But it was in 1258, under the command of Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis, that the Mongols delivered their most catastrophic blow to Islamic civilization, the siege of Baghdad, the obliteration of the House of Wisdom, the massacre of hundreds of thousands, and the execution of the Abbasid Caliph, a symbolic termination of a golden age 5 centuries in the making. Yet the Mongol advance was finally checked in 1260 at the Battle of An-Jalut in Palestine, where a remarkable polity, the Mamluks of Egypt, slave soldiers of Turkic origin who had seized power from the Ayyubids, rose to defend the Islamic world, defeating the Mongols in the first major setback the empire had ever suffered, and subsequently crushing the last Crusader fortresses along the Mediterranean coast, earning their reputation as saviors of Islam. Ruling from Cairo, the Mamluks revived a ceremonial Abbasid caliphate under their supervision, built monumental architecture, controlled lucrative trade routes, and presided over a vibrant, if often tumultuous, society for nearly 3 centuries. Meanwhile, the Mongol Empire fractured into rival khanates, several of which, most notably the Il Khanate in Persia, gradually converted to Islam, adopted Turkic and Persian cultural forms, and fostered new florescences of art, architecture, and scholarship, proving that Mongol rule could be not only destructive but transformative. Yet the Il Khanate, too, would fade, giving way in the 14th century to the brutal conquests of Timur, whose campaigns across the Middle East, Central Asia, and India left cities in ruins but also planted the seeds of new cultural efflorescence under his descendants, the Timurids, who would shape Persianate culture for generations. And then, as the medieval world gave way to the early modern, a small frontier principality on the edge of the Byzantine Empire began its unlikely ascent, founded around 1300 by a chieftain named Osman. This Beylik would expand under his heirs into the Ottoman Empire, gradually absorbing rival Turkish states, pushing into the Balkans, and ultimately striking at the heart of Byzantium itself. In 1453, under Mehmed II, the Ottomans captured Constantinople, ending the Byzantine Empire and transforming the ancient city into Istanbul, the new imperial capital of a rising Muslim superpower. Under later sultans, particularly Selim the Grim and Sulayman the Magnificent, the Ottoman realm expanded across the Middle East, North Africa, and southeastern Europe, incorporating Cairo in 1517, extinguishing the Mamluk Sultanate, and claiming the mantle of Caliph, uniting political and religious leadership of Sunni Islam under Ottoman authority. Yet the Islamic world was no longer monolithic, for to the east the Safavid Empire emerged in Persia, institutionalizing Shia Islam as a state creed and shaping the contours of Iranian identity, while further east the Mughal Empire rose in India, blending Persian, Turkic, and Indian traditions into a dazzling imperial synthesis. Together, these three Ottomans, Safavids, and Mughals formed the Gunpowder Empires, early modern giants wielding firearms, centralized bureaucracies, and sophisticated statecraft, and though they rivaled one another for territory, trade, and influence, they collectively represented the new face of Islamic power in the early modern world. But even the greatest empires fade, and as centuries passed the Ottomans encountered internal stagnation, European encroachment, economic strain, and nationalist movements, until at last, in the wake of World War I, the empire dissolved, the caliphate was abolished, and the final vestige of the thousand-year institution that had shaped Islamic political imagination came to an end. And yet, across the ruins and the memories, the legacies of these centuries continue to reverberate in the languages, borders, cultures, religions, and identities of millions, reminding us that from the once overlooked deserts of Arabia emerged not merely an empire, but a civilizational world whose influence would stretch from the Atlantic to the Himalayas, from the sands of Arabia to the rivers of Europe, and far beyond, shaping the human story in ways that continue to unfold with each passing generation.